The sun was setting over the busy streets of a lively city neighborhood, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The air buzzed with the sounds of cars honking, people chatting, and the occasional bark of a dog tied to a post outside a corner store. Inside one of these small shops, a young woman named Rachel stood behind the counter, her face tight with frustration. It had been a long, exhausting day. Customers came in waves, some rude, others impatient, and many simply indifferent. The shelves were running low on essentials, and she hadn't even had time for a proper lunch break. Rachel sighed deeply as she glanced at the clock, willing the hours to move faster so she could finally go home. Just then, the door creaked open, and an elderly black woman stepped inside. She walked slowly, leaning slightly on her cane, her eyes scanning the aisles thoughtfully. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Carter, though no one in the store knew that yet. Dressed in a modest floral dress, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silver hair neatly tied back in a bun. She moved toward the snack aisle, picked up a small bag of chips, and made her way to the counter. Rachel forced a smile as Mrs. Carter approached. "That'll be $2.50, she said quickly, her tone clipped. Mrs. Carter nodded and began rummaging through her purse, pulling out crumpled bills and loose coins. She carefully counted them, her hands trembling slightly from age. Time seemed to stretch as Rachel watched, growing more irritated by the second. Couldn't this woman hurry up? Didn't she see there were other customers waiting? Finally, Mrs. Carter placed the money on the counter. But just as Rachel reached for it, a coin slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. For a brief moment, everything went silent. Rachel's patience snapped like a brittle twig. "Oh, come on," she blurted out, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Can you please hurry up? You're holding everyone up." Mrs. Carter froze, her weathered face registering hurt. But before she could say anything, Rachel added sharply, "Never mind. Take your stuff and leave." She waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing away an unwanted fly. A few nearby customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Mrs. Carter silently gathered her things, her lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the store, her steps slower than before. As the door closed behind her, Rachel immediately regretted her outburst, but only for a fleeting moment. She shook her head, convincing herself that she was justified. After all, she'd been working nonstop, dealing with difficult people all day. Surely, everyone would understand why she lost her temper, right? What Rachel didn't realize, however, was that this seemingly insignificant interaction would soon spiral into something far bigger than she could have imagined. Unbeknownst to her, Mrs. Carter wasn't just any ordinary customer, and the consequences of Rachel's harsh words would ripple through the community and her own life in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. That evening, Marcus sat at the dining table with his grandmother, a stack of old photo albums spread out before them. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards as they shifted in their seats. Mrs. Carter's eyes lit up as she flipped through the pages, each photograph a window into the past. There were pictures of her late husband, James, standing proudly in front of various properties he had acquired over the years. His wide smile and confident stance spoke volumes about the man he was, a visionary who worked tirelessly to build a better future for his family and community. "Do you remember this one?" Marcus asked, pointing to a faded black and white image of a modest brick building. It was the very same structure that housed the convenience store where Rachel worked. Mrs. Carter nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of the photograph. "Of course I do," she said softly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "That was one of the first buildings your grandfather bought. He always said it would be a cornerstone of this neighborhood." As they continued flipping through the album, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Growing up, he had heard stories about his grandfather's accomplishments, but seeing the tangible evidence, the deeds, contracts, and photographs, made it all feel so much more real. James Carter hadn't just been a businessman. He had been a pillar of the community, someone who believed in lifting others up while building his own legacy. The properties he owned weren't just investments, they were opportunities to provide jobs, affordable housing, and safe spaces for local businesses to thrive. Mrs. Carter paused on a particular page, her gaze lingering on a photo of James shaking hands with a group of shopkeepers outside the same brick building. He used to say that owning property wasn't just about making money, she recalled, her voice steady now, filled with pride. It was about responsibility, about making sure the people here had what they needed to live well. She smiled faintly, lost in the memory. After he passed, I focused on raising you and your siblings. I didn't think much about the properties anymore. They were leased out, and I trusted the tenants to take care of things. Marcus listened intently, absorbing every word. He knew how hard his grandmother had worked after James's death, juggling motherhood and managing the family's affairs while grieving her loss. It was no wonder she had let some details slip through the cracks. But now, as he looked at the lease agreements and ownership papers tucked inside the album, he realized the significance of what they had. This wasn't just about a single rude cashier or one bad day at the store. It was about reclaiming a piece of their family's history and ensuring it reflected the values James had stood for. The weight of this realization settled over Marcus like a warm blanket. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just as a grandson seeking justice for his grandmother, but as a steward of his family's legacy. Turning to Mrs. Carter, he asked gently, "Grandma, do you think Grandpa would want us to step in? To make sure the store, and the people running it, are doing right by the community?" Mrs. Carter hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowing as she considered the question. Then, with a slow nod, she replied, "Your grandfather always believed in second chances, but he also believed in accountability. If we can find a way to hold that young woman responsible without destroying her, maybe we can honor his memory and teach her something valuable in the process." Her words struck a chord with Marcus. This wasn't going to be about revenge or punishment. It was about transformation. As he closed the photo album and gathered the documents, he felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it, not just for his grandmother, but for the entire community his grandfather had loved so dearly. The positive changes in Rachel's life began to ripple outward, touching not just her but the entire community. As word of her efforts continued to spread, more and more people started returning to the convenience store. Customers who had once vowed never to step foot inside were now greeted by a smiling Rachel who remembered their names and asked about their families. The atmosphere in the shop shifted dramatically. It became less transactional and more personal, a place where neighbors felt seen and valued. Rachel also took it upon themselves to make tangible improvements to the store itself. She noticed that many items on the shelves were outdated or overpriced, so she worked with the manager to bring in fresher produce and affordable essentials. A small bulletin board was added near the counter, displaying flyers for local events, job opportunities, and community resources. It quickly became a hub of information, drawing even more foot traffic into the store. For the first time in years, the business thrived, not because of flashy promotions, but because it had become an integral part of the neighborhood again. Marcus kept a watchful eye on these developments, ensuring Rachel stayed true to her commitments while also encouraging her growth. He often stopped by the store unannounced, sometimes chatting with customers to gauge their opinions. To his delight, most feedback was overwhelmingly positive. "She's changed," one elderly man told him during one visit. "You can tell she cares now." Another customer chimed in, saying, "It's like the whole vibe of this place has turned around." To celebrate the progress, Marcus decided to host another public event, a Community Appreciation Day, held right outside the convenience store. Local vendors set up stalls offering free samples of homemade goods, musicians played lively tunes, and children laughed as they played games organized by volunteers. The highlight of the day was a short speech given by Marcus, who thanked everyone for their support and emphasized the importance of unity. When it was Rachel's turn to speak, she stood nervously at the makeshift podium, clutching the handwritten note. Her voice wavered at first, but as she looked out at the crowd, many of whom she now recognized as regular customers, her confidence grew. "I want to thank each and every one of you for giving me a second chance," she began. "When I think back to how I used to act, I'm ashamed, but your patience and kindness have taught me so much. This isn't just my redemption story, it's ours. Together, we've shown that change is possible when we choose understanding over judgment." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning her loud applause and cheers. Among the crowd stood Mrs. Carter, watching quietly from a distance. Though she hadn't fully forgiven Rachel yet, she couldn't deny the impact of her transformation. After the speeches ended, Marcus invited Mrs. Carter to join him near the stage. Hand in hand, they cut a ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance of the store, symbolizing its rebirth as a pillar of the community. As the celebration wound down, Rachel approached Mrs. Carter hesitantly. "Thank you for being here today," she said softly, "and thank you for letting me try to make things right." Mrs. Carter studied her for a moment before responding. "You've come a long way, young lady. Keep going. You're proving that people can change." With those words, she patted Rachel gently on the arm and walked away, leaving behind a sense of closure neither woman had felt before. That evening, as Rachel locked up the store and prepared to head home, she paused to take in the scene around her. The streetlights cast a warm glow over the bustling neighborhood, and laughter echoed from nearby homes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt proud, not just of herself, but of the role she played in rebuilding something meaningful. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she truly believed she was exactly where she was meant to be. Months had passed since the Community Appreciation Day, and the convenience store had become more than just a place to buy groceries. It was now a symbol of hope, resilience, and unity. The once tense atmosphere had transformed into one of warmth and connection, where customers lingered longer than necessary, sharing stories and laughter with Rachel and each other. Neighbors who had barely known each other before were now exchanging recipes, gardening tips, and even invitations to family dinners. The ripple effect of Rachel's journey extended far beyond her personal redemption. It brought the entire community closer together. Rachel herself had grown in ways she never imagined. She no longer saw her job as a burden, but as an opportunity to make a difference. Every interaction, even the challenging ones, was a chance to practice patience, empathy, and understanding. Her newfound perspective didn't mean life was perfect. There were still tough days when old habits threatened to creep back. But instead of letting frustration consume her, Rachel reminded herself of how far she'd come and how much further she wanted to go. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus arrived at the store with a surprise for Rachel. He carried a small plaque engraved with the words, "A cornerstone of our community." Below the inscription was a short dedication, in honor of those who believe in second chances and work tirelessly to build bridges where walls once stood. Rachel's eyes widened as Marcus handed it to her. "This is for you," he said with a proud smile. "It's not just about recognizing your hard work. It's about celebrating what this store has become because of you." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she read the inscription over and over again. For so long, she had felt like an outsider in the neighborhood, someone merely passing through without leaving a mark. Now, she realized she had helped create something lasting and meaningful. She hugged Marcus tightly, unable to find the right words to express her gratitude. Later that day, Mrs. Carter visited the store, her steps slow but steady as she approached the counter. Rachel greeted her warmly, holding up the plaque. "Look what Marcus gave me today," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you or your family." Mrs. Carter studied the plaque thoughtfully before nodding approvingly. "It suits you," she said simply. Then, after a pause, she added, "And it suits this place. My husband would be proud." The two women shared a quiet moment, their mutual respect evident in the way they looked at each other. Though neither said it aloud, Both understood that forgiveness wasn't a single event. It was a process, one they were navigating together. That evening, as Rachel prepared to close the store, Mrs. Carter surprised her by staying behind to help tidy up. They worked side by side in companionable silence, occasionally exchanging light-hearted comments about the quirks of running a small business. By the time they finished, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Standing outside the store, Rachel turned to Mrs. Carter and said, "Thank you for everything. I know I'll never fully undo what happened that day, but I promise to keep working to make things better. For you, for this neighborhood, and for myself." Mrs. Carter smiled softly, her gaze steady. "You already have," she replied. With that, she patted Rachel's arm gently and walked away, leaving behind a sense of peace that settled deeply within Rachel's heart. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Rachel and the community only grew stronger. The convenience store remained a thriving hub of activity, a testament to the power of accountability, growth, and forgiveness. And though Rachel knew she would always carry the lessons of her past mistakes with her, she also knew they no longer defined her. Instead, they fueled her commitment to building a brighter future, for herself and for everyone around her. In the end, the story wasn't just about Rachel or Mrs. Carter. It was about the enduring strength of a community that refused to give up on its people, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the convenience store with a calm but determined demeanor. The small shop was quieter than usual, likely due to the ongoing protests outside and the tension that had settled over the neighborhood. Rachel stood behind the counter, her face pale and drawn, as if she hadn't slept all night. She glanced up nervously when the bell above the door jingled, signaling Marcus's entrance. At first glance, he didn't seem particularly threatening, just a young man in jeans and a hoodie, but there was an air of authority about him that made her stomach tighten. "Hi," Marcus began, his tone measured but firm. "I'm Marcus Carter. I'm here to talk to you about what happened yesterday with my grandmother." Rachel's eyes widened in recognition. Mrs. Carter's name had been mentioned in nearly every social media post and protest sign over the past 24 hours. She swallowed hard, her mind racing as she tried to figure out who this man was and why he was addressing her so directly. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to upset anyone. I was just having a bad day." Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging her apology without letting her off the hook. "I understand that people have bad days," he said evenly, "but your actions hurt someone very important to me. And before we go any further, I think it's important for you to know something." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "My family owns this building." Rachel blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, she couldn't find the words to respond. Her thoughts were a chaotic swirl of panic and disbelief. Owning the building meant this man had the power to shut down the store entirely, and by extension, take away her job. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as she struggled to process the implications. Finally, she managed to choke out, "Wait, what? You own this place?" "We do," Marcus confirmed, his expression unreadable. "And while I could easily terminate the lease agreement because of how you treated my grandmother, I'm not here to make rash decisions. I want to give you a chance to explain yourself." Rachel hesitated, unsure where to begin. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fumbled through her explanation. "I swear, I didn't know who she was," she said earnestly. "If I had known, I would never have spoken to her like that. I've been stressed lately, working long hours, dealing with rude customers. It's no excuse, I know, but I really am sorry." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Marcus studied her carefully, searching for sincerity in her tear-filled eyes. After a moment, he sighed softly. "Look, I believe you're sorry," he said, "but apologies aren't enough. Actions matter more. If you truly regret what happened, you'll need to prove it." He went on to outline his terms. Rachel would be required to volunteer in community service projects, attend workshops on cultural sensitivity and racial awareness, and actively work to rebuild trust within the neighborhood. If she failed to meet these conditions, the lease would be terminated without hesitation. It was a second chance, but one that came with clear expectations. Rachel listened intently, nodding furiously as Marcus spoke. By the time he finished, tears streamed freely down her face, but they weren't just tears of fear or shame. There was gratitude there too, a flicker of hope that she might still redeem herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes. I promise." For the first time since stepping into the store, Marcus allowed himself a small, cautious smile. "Good," he said simply, "because this isn't just about you or my grandmother. It's about making sure this community feels respected and valued. Let's get started." As he turned to leave, Rachel watched him go, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and determination. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn this mistake into something meaningful, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. The moment Mrs. Carter stepped out of the store, her heart heavy with the sting of Rachel's words, the neighborhood seemed to shift around her. The once familiar streets felt colder somehow, and the cheerful chatter of passersby faded into a distant hum. She tightened her grip on the bag of chips she had bought, her fingers trembling not from age, but from the weight of what had just happened. Though she was no stranger to hardship, having lived through decades of change and challenge, this encounter left her feeling smaller than she had in years. Word of the incident spread quickly, as it often does in tight-knit communities. A young mother who had been waiting in line behind Mrs. Carter couldn't help but share what she'd witnessed with her friends. "That poor woman," she said, shaking her head. "She didn't deserve to be treated like that." From there, the story took on a life of its own, traveling from one person to the next until it reached the ears of nearly everyone in the area. By evening, social media posts began popping up, some calling out Rachel by name and others demanding justice for Mrs. Carter. The backlash wasn't limited to online forums. The very next morning, a group of concerned neighbors gathered outside the convenience store, holding signs that read, "Respect our elders," and "No room for rudeness." Passersby stopped to read the messages, nodding in agreement or joining the growing crowd. Some even recorded videos, amplifying the message beyond the neighborhood. Inside the store, Rachel watched nervously as the protest unfolded. Her hands trembled as she rang up purchases, her mind racing with worry. Would she lose her job over this? Was the store going to shut down? Meanwhile, Mrs. Carter returned home, still reeling from the day's events. Her grandson, Marcus, noticed something was off the moment he walked through the door. Normally warm and talkative, his grandmother sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. Concerned, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Grandma, are you okay?" he asked softly. At first, Mrs. Carter hesitated, reluctant to burden her grandson with her troubles. But Marcus persisted, sensing that something serious had happened. Finally, she sighed and recounted the entire ordeal, the dismissive tone, the harsh words, the humiliation of being treated so poorly in front of strangers. As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, not of weakness but of frustration. "I don't understand why someone would treat another human being that way," she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't about the money or the time. It was about respect. Marcus listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he stood up abruptly, his protective instincts kicking in. "This isn't right, Grandma," he said firmly. "No one should talk to you, or anyone, like that. We're going to do something about it." His tone was resolute, leaving no room for argument. Mrs. Carter looked at him, surprised by his determination, but also grateful for his support. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that retaliation might only make things worse. But Marcus wasn't thinking about revenge. He had something bigger in mind, though he kept those plans to himself for now. Instead, he spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls, reaching out to friends and acquaintances who could help shed light on the situation. One conversation led to another, and soon, Marcus uncovered a detail that changed everything. The building where the convenience store operated belonged to his family. Decades ago, his late grandfather had purchased it as part of a larger real estate portfolio. Though the property had since been leased out to various tenants, the ownership papers remained in their name. Armed with this revelation, Marcus realized they held significant power over the store, and by extension, over Rachel. But instead of acting impulsively, he decided to approach the matter thoughtfully. This wasn't just about teaching someone a lesson. It was about finding a way to turn a painful moment into an opportunity for growth for everyone involved. Little did Marcus know, his decision would set off a chain of events that would test his patience, challenge Rachel's character, and ultimately bring the community closer together. Over the next few weeks, Rachel threw herself into the tasks Marcus had set for her. At first, she approached them with a mix of fear and obligation. Fear of losing her job and home, and an obligation to make things right. But as she began attending workshops on cultural sensitivity and volunteering in the community, something unexpected started to happen. The more time she spent listening to others, learning their stories, and seeing the world through their eyes, the more her perspective shifted. One of her first assignments was to help organize a food drive at a local church. She arrived early one Saturday morning, unsure of what to expect. The church basement was already bustling with activity when she walked in. Volunteers of all ages and backgrounds were sorting cans, packing boxes, and chatting animatedly as they worked. Rachel felt out of place at first, standing awkwardly near the door while trying to figure out where to start. But then a kind elderly man named Mr. Thompson approached her with a warm smile. "You must be Rachel," he said. "We've been expecting you. Come on, I'll show you the ropes." As the day went on, Rachel found herself immersed in the rhythm of the work. She teamed up with a young mother named Jasmine, who shared stories about raising her kids in the neighborhood while juggling multiple jobs. Rachel listened intently, struck by the resilience and strength in Jasmine's voice. Later, she helped distribute food to families waiting patiently in line. One woman, holding her toddler tightly in her arms, thanked Rachel so sincerely that it brought tears to her eyes. For the first time in years, Rachel felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, a network of people supporting each other despite their struggles. Her cultural sensitivity workshops were equally eye-opening. Led by experienced facilitators, the sessions encouraged open dialogue about race, privilege, and systemic inequality. At first, Rachel hesitated to speak up, worried she might say the wrong thing. But as the days passed, she grew more comfortable sharing her thoughts and asking questions. She learned about the historical roots of racial injustice and how even small actions or words could perpetuate harm. It wasn't easy hearing some of the truths laid bare, but Rachel realized that discomfort was part of growth. Each session left her with new insights and a deeper commitment to change. Meanwhile, Marcus kept a close watch on her progress, checking in periodically to see how she was doing. During one of these conversations, Rachel opened up about her experiences. "I never really thought about how my words affected others before," she admitted. "But now, I feel like I'm waking up to things I should have noticed a long time ago." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the point," he said. "Awareness is the first step toward real change." Word of Rachel's efforts began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Some people remained skeptical, unwilling to forgive her past behavior. Others, however, noticed her genuine effort and slowly warmed up to her. When she offered to assist with a community cleanup project, several neighbors joined in alongside her, working side by side to beautify their shared spaces. By the end of the day, laughter filled the air as everyone admired their handiwork. For Rachel, it was a powerful reminder that trust could be rebuilt, one small action at a time. As the weeks turned into a month, Rachel started to notice subtle shifts within herself. She no longer dreaded going to work. Instead, she saw the store as an opportunity to connect with customers in meaningful ways. She greeted them warmly, asked how their days were going, and made an effort to remember their names. Slowly but surely, the tension in the shop began to ease. Even Mrs. Carter, who occasionally visited the store to pick up essentials, noticed the difference. Though she hadn't spoken directly to Rachel yet, there was a softness in her gaze whenever their paths crossed, a sign that healing was possible. For Rachel, this journey was far from over. There were still moments of doubt and frustration, times when she wondered if she'd ever truly earned forgiveness. But deep down, she knew she was on the right path. Every conversation, every act of service, and every lesson learned brought her closer to becoming someone her younger self wouldn't have recognized. And though the road ahead would require continued effort, Rachel felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for the community she was beginning to call her own. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel's transformation became impossible to ignore. The once frustrated and short-tempered cashier was now a fixture of positivity in the neighborhood. Her smile greeted customers warmly as they entered the store, and her patience had replaced the impatience that used to define her interactions. She no longer saw people merely as obstacles to getting through her shift. Instead, she viewed them as individuals with stories, struggles, and lives beyond the walls of the convenience store. Her involvement in the community didn't stop at food drives or cleanup projects. Rachel began attending local events, block parties, school fundraisers, and even storytelling nights hosted by seniors at the community center. At one such event, she found herself sitting alongside Mrs. Carter, who had been invited to share memories of the neighborhood's history. Rachel hesitated at first, unsure if Mrs. Carter wanted her there, but when their eyes met, Mrs. Carter gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was acknowledgement, a step forward. During the storytelling session, Mrs. Carter spoke fondly of her late husband and his vision for the community. He believed in second chances, she said, glancing briefly at Rachel. Not because he thought mistakes didn't matter, but because he knew people could grow if given the chance. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rachel felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. Instead, she nodded slightly, silently thanking Mrs. Carter for including her in the moment. Afterward, Marcus approached Rachel and suggested that it might be time for her to sit down with his grandmother privately. "She's ready," he said simply. "And I think you are too." Rachel agreed, though her stomach churned with nerves. The following afternoon, she arrived at Mrs. Carter's modest home, carrying a small potted plant as a gesture of goodwill. When Mrs. Carter opened the door, she raised an eyebrow at the gift, but accepted it graciously. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. The living room was cozy, filled with photographs and mementos from decades past. Rachel sat on the edge of a floral-patterned couch, her hands clasped tightly together. Mrs. Carter settled into a chair across from her, studying her quietly before speaking. "I want to hear from you," she said finally. "Tell me why you've worked so hard these past few months." Rachel took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she began. "At first, I did it because I was scared. Scared of losing my job, scared of disappointing Marcus, scared of what everyone thought of me. But as I kept going, I realized something. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for people like you. People I hurt without even realizing it. I never stopped to think about how my words affected others, and I'm so sorry for that. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can see that I'm trying to be better." Mrs. Carter listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Rachel finished, she leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh. "You know, regret is a powerful thing," she said after a moment. "It can either break you or build you up. From what I've seen, you've chosen the latter. That takes courage." Her words brought tears to Rachel's eyes. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope, not just for redemption, but for connection. Over the course of the conversation, the two women talked openly about their lives. sharing pieces of themselves they rarely reveal to others. By the end of the visit, Mrs. Carter extended a tentative hand, which Rachel took gratefully. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Word of their meeting spread quickly, thanks in part to Marcus, who shared the story during a public forum he organized to discuss community relations. The event drew a diverse crowd, eager to hear about progress and offer suggestions for improvement. When Rachel stood up to speak, her voice wavered at first, but soon steadied as she recounted her journey. "I made a terrible mistake," she admitted, "but I've learned that mistakes don't have to define us. What matters is what we do next." The audience erupted into applause, not because they thought Rachel was perfect, but because they recognized her effort. As she stepped down from the podium, she caught Mrs. Carter's eye from across the room. The elderly woman gave her a slight nod, accompanied by the faintest hint of a smile. It was enough to remind Rachel that while forgiveness may take time, every step toward understanding brought her closer to earning it, and to becoming the person she wanted to be.